keep it rolling. Let's get into it. Okay, first question. Oh, before I actually, one more thing. We will get to Q&A at the end of this webinar, and that's a pretty important part of this webinar. But we don't do Q&A until we're pretty much done with our few questions. If you have a question, write it down right away. It's just really good practice. Otherwise, you're thinking of the question or you forget, which would be worse. So write down your question right away, and then we'll take them in the order that we receive them. Thanks. All right, here we go. Question one. Okay, we talked about a maturity model a little bit, even in our advertising for this webinar. I'm not sure an official I-18N maturity model exists, but maybe you talk about that a little bit, Addison. What have you seen and the like?
Sure. So when we were talking about having this webinar, it was like, there might be a thinking there's the internationalization maturity model. I don't think that's really relevant because every organization is a little bit different, and what maturity means for one organization or company will be different than what somebody else does. But I think everybody should have a maturity model in mind for their organization in terms of where are we relative to what we could be, and how do we affect these things. And I think one of the key aspects for me is that virtually every internationalization effort begins with like a remedial project. There's some number of lines of code, there's some product out there, and the business leader decides, I would like to take this to country X, or I have a requirement to do language X. And so what will it take to do that? And so the internationalization is a project that takes developer resources and time and effort and detracts from other features that could be being built instead of internationalizing. And when you've finished the remedial project, the lesson that you've taught leadership is internationalization is expensive and slows you down, and it makes your product less something, right? And so you have to get out of the mode of people thinking about that. However, the localization team continues to cost money. It's cents per word kind of cost, linear cost for more languages means more money. And there's a tendency for us to talk about the internationalization team as needing some more resources or needing to grow and so on. And so we tell scary stories about, did you know that in other countries they have these different date formats, and they use a different calendar, and they write things funny, and there are no spaces between Japanese words, and right? We're scaring leadership into thinking that internationalization is a costly thing, and so they're looking for ways to avoid doing it, when in fact the message needs to be internationalization is free. It costs nothing if you do it from the start. And where you want to go, a maturity model is always moving up from the tail end of the project towards closer and closer to the beginning, and then getting closer and closer to your international customers. And as an internationalization person, it's always been part of my view that I'm repping the large percentage of your customers who are not Americans or who don't speak English, and that you need to have a voice for them and have a seat at the table for them when the product is being developed and designed and planned, rather than something that you add on. And that my email signature is a little bit famous. It has this koan in it. Internationalization is not a feature, it is an architecture. That for me is sort of the summary of it. When people think of it as a feature, we are internationalized. They're not thinking about it in the right way. It's not something you do later or add on. It's something for you.
Along those lines, I personally like the kind of analogy of the rise of UX as a user experience as a study. It's so well proven when you use an app that when it's graceful, it's more addictive, sort of. You want to use it, right? And so people don't question the decision of the color blue, and just for example, right? There isn't like a whole review. Oh, changing our UI is going to cost money. It's more like, no, this is how you advance and make your product sticky if it's pretty and pleasant to use, right? This is just a form of, I look at I18N, it's almost like a part of UX, and you want it built in, just like you're going to have processes in your organization. Many have switched to, say, designers working on the interface, what it should look like, and prototyping that for the developers to follow, instead of hoping that the developers put the right widget in the right place. It's not necessarily their job. Yeah,
Yeah, and then developers build what the customer experience designers tell them to build.
that's right.
And in
Right.
many cases, it's like finicky pixel accuracy. Even it's where they
Right.
where they so the a group that you really need to infect with the I18N virus is the customer experience, the user experience
Mhm.
design team, so that they think about things, so that they understand when they are specifying things, not to get super creative in terms of, like, say, special date formats or
Yeah.
special presentation of things. Or if they feel the need to do that, that they need to think about the international presentation when they're designing the English experience.
Mhm.
Typically it is English that they're designing.
Mhm.
Um, I, I years ago, I had a conversation with, I worked at Amazon. I had a conversation with Jeff Bezos, and he's like,
Mhm.
and Jeff is like, we're building the very best possible US English interface. And of course, we'll come back and build the very best possible, like, German for Germany interface. And I'm like, no, you won't. You're not going to come back and re-engineer this product for Germany. You're going to build this product for the US, and then we're going to localize it into German. And if you're too fixated on the US product and you have no affordance for the German product will suck relative to what it could be. And your instinct is the right one. You want the best experience for those customers, but what German customers want isn't remarkably different from what American customers want. They want fast delivery and cheap prices and quality selection and all those same things. But they want it in German, and they want it in their culture, and they want some differences, and we can actually plan for those at the design level rather than thinking we're going to re-engineer the product later, because there isn't time. And down that path of separation is, now I have two products, and the international product is poorer than the American product because the innovation went in the American product, and you're always a little bit ahead. And that's all of those things conspire against what you really want to do with being global. So it's invest
Right.
invest in the front and not downstream.
Good. Good. All right. We kind of touched on this question quite a bit. Maybe you can, kind of expand on it a little bit, but uh, uh, what does success look like, essentially?
So for me, there's two levels of, I think, success. The first level of success, maybe three. The first level of success is you rewrite developer DNA so that they no longer are digging the hole deeper. Developers come to you, they don't have any internationalization training and so on. And so you need to get them to, stop hard coding strings and do a bunch of things. And there's some strategies there. Maybe we'll touch on those later for how to get at developers. Um, the second level is to get to that front of the project, the process, where the global product is the product that you're building and shipping, that you're sim shipping the product generally, that you have one code base for the world, that you have one feature set for the world, and the product managers and the customer experience designers are aware that that they think it's important to deliver the international product. And maybe the third level, and I especially learned this in the 14 years I spent at Amazon, is after you start to deliver a global product, is then starting to hear your global customers and hear your global markets successfully. Because the US is a fairly monoculture sort of, we're not necessarily the leaders in any particular area of technical stuff. So I was in retail for many years at Amazon, and the innovative retail on the web applications were all happening in other countries. They were not happening in the US. And so if you're working on 2-day delivery in the US, Japan is working on same-day delivery. And if you can learn the lessons of same-day delivery, you can really do interesting things. And so that's learning to hear those customers not as secondhand citizens who get the product that we're building that we think is innovative for the Americans think is innovative, but actually seeing where the leading positions are in your industry, in your space, when those people are international, and they frequently are. If you hear those customers and you hear those competitors and those opportunities, you will build a much better product. And so for me, that's real ultimate maturity. Is English is another language and the US is another market. And you find where the leading edges are, and that'll evolve over time. It's always changing. The leading edges are where the really interesting problems are.
Very good. Very good. I really like that. What triggers an organization to shift? Often you start like I can't tell you how many times an organization calls us in. They say, "Oh, well, this part of our product is internationalized. We don't know about this part. We've actually only translated into French Canadian or something like that, like one of the more simple things technically to do." But what do we do? How do we know, so to speak? But like what triggers? That's an example of ad hoc. It's only one. There's often even companies that are in lots of languages that still take a very ad hoc approach. So maybe Addison, you've probably seen that plenty.
Yeah. Yeah, and it varies. It's people don't necessarily learn the lesson. I often say that you can localize any product once. And if you don't learn the internationalization lesson, what happens is you internationalize the product once over and over again. Every time you come at it, you're doing that. The localization teams feel unempowered. I often look at it as localization and like QA are down at the tail end of the dog. And what you find there as defects are really hard to change because the developers are done with the code. They do not want to go. They will hack their way past the problems that you bring up. They will seek out convenient solutions to avoid actually solving the problem. And so you have to. That's the problem is that you can be stuck in that forever, and particularly since generally speaking, the international markets are smaller than your home market for your company, particularly in the beginning. You can be stuck in that mode for a long time and not say, "Hey, let's never do this again." Let's not throw it over the wall, and the localizers scramble and they're madly stuffing strings in on the last day before the product ships. and the people in country are complaining that the translation quality is terrible, when in fact the translation's fine. It's the internationalization causes strings to come together in unusual ways, or where the translators can't do an effective translation and so on. All of that happens. And so you have to get away from that, and you have to, again, start going upstream in the development cycle, getting to developers when they're writing code, and going upstream with the product managers and the UX designers and the people at the front end of the process, and influencing business leaders and influencing them by saying, this internationalization stuff is free. It costs you nothing if we do it at the start. But it's costing you later because we didn't do it. And so you have to do remedial work, and you have to do bug fix. And that's costing you a lot of agility. I can save you 5 or 10% of your development cycle from this period of bug fix, and give you more features if you let me monkey with the DNA of the developers and get them to write code correctly. And a lot of strategy is, I like when you first do internationalization, you bring in like libraries like ICU and stuff like that, and tools for people, and developers can use them or not. And so I call that the buffet, the food supply. You can choose to eat these yummy I18N things, but you can choose to eat these non-internationalized APIs and libraries too. And there's nobody to make it. And so what you want to do is move upstream. And usually the first stop is you build the I18N libraries into the frameworks that the developers are using. I call it water supply, so that it's right there. They don't have to install anything. And you harp on them to use these things. And if you're really successful, you move even further upstream into the air supply. That is, when you sit down to write an Android app, you automatically have a resource file. And the IDE helps you put the strings in the resource file if you choose to do that. That's much more air supply-like. Really good, well-internationalized frameworks make it dead simple. Even the default is to write internationalized code, because that's the interface that you have, and you have to work to de-internationalize your code, and that's the ideal place to get to. So if you are able to do that, a very small internationalization team can have a broad impact across even very large development organizations, because instead of doing cleanup work, and instead of chasing people, you're building capability in, and then you have your internal Stack Overflow thing to answer people's questions, right? That's a much better place to be at. So
yeah, well, that's good. I can tell you that a lot of people on this webinar aren't at that situation yet. I'm going to add a couple of things to that. We can address it as we move on. But first of all, internationalization errors in most organizations go to Jira to die. And it's for exactly that thing that you said, that the developers don't want to revisit. They're tasked with the next feature, not cleaning up this concatenation that was like Lord knows where in the code base, right? So you really want to catch that, or have a way to find that issue, so you can say, not just like, hey, on the screen it looks like this. You actually relate to the line of code. That comes down to tools. But the other thing is that a common pushback against localization managers is, oh yeah, we're internationalized. We use XYZ JavaScript, I18N libraries, and it's not enough. You actually have to put those things into use properly. And let's in defense of the developers, the very first thing they learn is to embed a string, hello world. The next thing they learn is to concatenate
a string, yeah.
Right?
Hello username, yeah.
Right. I mean, that's how programming works. I mean, if somebody's, there are certain programming languages where, you're expected to literally perform things in a non-internationalized way. So you have to unthink unteach a lot of practice. All right, we need to move on. You and I could like never get through this. So- all right, let's talk about architectural practices. You said IATN is an architecture, so let's segue into an example, maybe.
Yeah. So again, it's a you have to get people to start to think about, okay, so what if we're going to do this international stuff from the beginning? And one of the challenges with that is, let's pick on something, postal addresses, right?
Mhm.
I can build a really rich set of widgets to allow for validation and input of postal addresses for the USA. And then you find that there's 200 countries in the world, and there's a book a guy did some years ago. And when you print it out, it's an ebook, and you print it out, it's like this thick on paper, of postal address formats of the world. Um, and validating that would be impossible. And so what you have to think about is there's an architectural thing that says build the generic, build the US customization as a plugin, have hooks for people to plug in these additional things. That's at a higher level than just the hard-coded string thing, or use resource files and so on. I think some of the things I mentioned before, getting into the air supply, moving from water supply where you have a library that's present to moving to air supply where you design, for example, templating languages, and you go in and fix it so that the internationalization is present by default. That's kind of the internationalization approach, where you're thinking about, how do you get people to use these things without having to think about it. And I think that's a key thing. There's a bunch of tactical things you can do as well. Starting with pseudo-locales and starting with some of these other tooling things, so that people have a structure that they build around, that they are that they're starting from a global perspective. But the main thing is the seat at the table at design time is important, because people will unintentionally throw international under a bus, because they don't realize where the complexity is, or where they're making a cultural assumption about something. I mean, the famous, and it's so long ago that it's probably no longer relevant, but when QuickBooks first did their localization, they had a checkbook interface,
Right.
and nobody in Germany uses personal checks. They use bank drafts instead. So their user interface was like this completely foreign experience. And now what is that, like 30 years ago now? But that's the kind of blind spot that people can have if you don't have a seat at the table early and go,
Yeah,
this
yeah,
is
yeah.
valid, and now you're making a cultural assumption. You don't know that you're doing
Actually, the CEO of well, it was,
that into it. Yeah.
not sure if they were into it yet, but I know that the CEO gave a whole talk about their mistakes with international and internationalization. It was pretty cool thing. They later hired us actually, so that was cool. All right, here we go. Okay. Um, let's talk about how you raise, like a little bit of the how. Let's get down to brass. Um,
Yeah.
uh, yes.
So the first reaction a lot of us have, particularly in larger organizations, is we need to do training, right? As you mentioned before, the first program everybody learns in every programming language they ever use is an IETN bug, and so is the second. And so the feeling is that the way to fix this somehow is by training. And my experience is that that's not effective. Taking people in a room for an hour and yelling at them about internationalization, the only thing that they got was, well, I checked the box. I did the training, right? and they might remember one or two concepts, but it's not relevant to their daily job. And so for technical teams, you really need to meet developers in the development environment, and emphasize things there. And that's one of the things I really love about LingoPort's tools. You can put Globalizer in your code review system, and that tells developers every time they do one of these things, they will very rapidly quit writing those bugs, because there's always this comment immediately on their code review from some bot telling them, hey, you hard-coded this string, and that's a concatenation, and this date is formatted funny. You can immediately get to people there, and even better, you can integrate it in the IDE. So while they're typing, there's a bot looking over their shoulder going, did you mean to hard code that string? Is that really a program internal value, or is somebody going to see that string? That looks like an English word to me. And so that's, tools are especially effective in getting to people, getting to developers, and being there to help them not do the bad thing from the beginning. So there are other things like that. If you run everybody in a locale that is a test locale where the pseudo decoration is going on, developers begin to internalize the pseudo appearance. Not just that the English looks like the design, but that the pseudo works, and the expansion works, and the truncation works, and those things. So getting to people in those spaces when the code is being written, and then having a very clear channel for people to go to when they hit a problem that they've never seen before, or maybe even you've never seen before. And that's one reason why I got off of the internet, being an internationalization consultant, when we first knew each other, 20 something years ago, and got into the customer side, because the really interesting problems are inside of products after they've removed the hard-coded strings and locale enabled. Then you get into super interesting challenges that you wouldn't have seen, that you would not see otherwise. And that's why you continue to have an I18N team, is to go, we could spot solve this here, but probably it's good to pull it back, have internationalization aware people work on the challenge, and then make that globally accessible in the libraries I mentioned before, and frameworks. So that, because gosh, you're doing search over customer input over here. Someone else is probably going to need to search text somewhere else. So let's have utilities for text search in global text search in many languages and scripts. Let's have tools for that readily available, so people are ready to go, immediately. You already have a canned solution. You're not repeating yourself.
By the way, when we send out the recording, I'll include, some links to like articles on pseudo-localization and the like. The pseudo-localization is kind of like, I look at it as like a first baseline, because it finds problems late. It's important to do no matter what you do, but it's not like, oh, now we've got this solved. Now we have pseudo-localization. Anyway,
it's like pseudo is never the longest language anyway. So
right.
It's there will be a language that has a longer string than that is.
Right. Still, I will say, even like our Figma plugins pseudo-localize automatically, and you can get an immediate machine translation in however many languages you need, or whatever, for the designers, not just the developers. So it's kind of cool. Anyway, at what stage does global readiness become critical? I think your answer is right away.
As before you've written any of your products, global readiness it becomes critical, and you can look at it a different way, which is that anything you defer and put off will become an issue later for you.
And
um,
expensive.
an expensive issue, and you will be incented to not fix it for
Right.
reasons,
Or
right?
pay us to fix it. All right.
Yeah, um, and so that's a challenge. It's interesting because I was talking to a leader at a company not too long ago, and he's like, um, "We have we have 60% of our revenue is global, and 40% is domestic. So what's my largest market? It's the domestic one." Right? And because my biggest international market might be 10% of my business or 8% of my business. So I don't hear them. And so I'm super focused on the people who are screaming for 40% of my revenue over here. And I'm willing to put these other things further down the list. Um, at Amazon, when I went and talked to teams, one of the things I always told my team going in is every team has a list of things that they're going to accomplish in the year, a set of goals. And when they're making that set of goals for the year, there will be a point at which they draw a line. And below that line are a set of things the team would really like to do and work on, that they're being prevented from working on because there aren't more people and more hours. And so I'm coming in and trying to leap over their wish list that they're not getting to, and some things on the list that they've already committed to get them to do something for global readiness. And so that speaks to needing to be at the planning phase of the project and get the global readiness in from the beginning, because installing that is super hard. There's a ton of friction that teams do not want to hear about, not because they don't think global is important, but because there's a bunch of things they're not getting to that they want to get to, that they're already not going to do. And their leaders know this, and so on. So you're selling, you're selling eat your vitamins, and people really want some more steak. And that's the challenge. So
Okay, we are getting close to out of time. Let's just take this question. I think we had one more, but let's just end on this one. And then go to the audience for questions. We have a couple of questions on Zoom already. There might be some on LinkedIn Live. Kate will have visibility of that. But
I'll talk really briefly about metrics. Your metrics may vary, but zero is an important metric, right? It doesn't cost anything to do internationalization. Another thing is, suppose you install Globalizer in your code review system. The number of bugs it should detect, zero is the correct number to detect, because the developers have learned not to do that anymore. And so you want to have measurements that are drive to zero for a lot of there's no delay between when the US product comes out and the global product comes out. Zero. You can even, if you ship the translations before the English product is done, that's even better. It's not be in the way ever, is kind of those are the kinds of metrics you should be thinking about, because those will be the ones where, and then you find yourself explaining why you still exist, but it's, you don't realize it, but I've saved you all of this pain.
well, it's sort of like laws. After a while, people don't break the law, but you better keep that law in place if you want. Well, this is a really bad
Yeah.
analogy, especially right now. But all right. I'm going to skip this and go to questions, because for now we can go back to that if need be. But here we go. We have two to begin with, and I urge you to add to this if you're in the audience here. First question: most software stacks provide, we cover this a little bit, but we'll go again. Most software stacks provide IATN and LTN, so that's internationalization and localization, as add-on modules or tools. Are there software stacks which include I18N as part of the core architecture and tool set so that it's easier to build your minimum viable product with I18N than without? So in
Um,
the supply, so to
yeah, I
speak.
mean, a lot of frameworks do include that today. It really, I mean, it's a good question because it's true that a lot of frameworks are written with the first I write the framework and then I write the resource system for it, and so you have um, every JavaScript framework has a blah blah blah. React I18N.
Mhm.
Every one of them has a this thing that you add on to get at these, and some of them have multiple choices that you can pick on. And so as leaders, we need to just remind people they need that from the beginning. There are a few that are better, but it's really it's such a broad space that it's hard to be specific. Um, Interestingly, one of the things I'm working on at Unicode is the message format working group, and our goal is to get the message format pattern language into every programming language and framework, one consistent one, so that we can build localization tools off of that, and so that we can teach developers once how to write internationalized messages rather than every one of them's a little bit different, and some have more or less capability. So is harmonizing that is sort of a super interesting goal that I've been working on for the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah. I will say that, on that last point, some of our products, one of the important capabilities is that we can normalize differences in resource file formats, particularly in the area of JSON and YAML, where it's sort of the Wild West, what the localization team may get and what their TMS or localization partner can deal with. So there's
And because
enough.
we have a super deep tool gap on the localization side, and particularly a lot of localization is actually MT first,
Mhm.
MTPE, right?
Mhm.
And the machines don't know anything about still to generally just don't know anything about the stuff. So we're just protecting things from the
Mhm.
machines. The machines don't participate. If we can get the machines to participate, we can generate much more fluent localization, because
Mhm.
the machine goes, oh, this is a plural, and I know how to explode the plural matrix for a plural
Mhm.
selector, and I can do the right matching because I know what the noun is and the verb is now. You could do some things that you couldn't do before, and which the machine and the post editor are both working to overcome the lack of awareness problem that the
Yeah,
that the source framework
yeah.
had.
You're actually kind of delving into some of our product roadmap, but in some of the more advanced features there. But yeah, I mean, I can't tell you how often we see on the customer side, because we there's a lot of full service that comes with our tools, and boy, a lot of translators, they're going fast and say they'll do things like break the ICU message format, really common. Anyway, we should move on.
Yeah.
This is a question near and dear to my heart. Do you provide I swear I didn't set this. Do you provide a service where you come to the company, evaluate the I18N situation, provide recommendations for fast improvements without requiring the company to buy additional tools? Yes, we do that. We don't require our tools as part of any service, although they tend to be self-fulfilling. There's a lot of our services where we use our tools alongside of our customers. Generally, it's like when we do our work, it's almost never like, here, we'll throw it over the wall, Lingo portal fix it. It's always some sort of hybrid engagement where we have the developer teams engaged and we're working together, and we're usually on the same Slack channel, some Slack channel or Teams channel, whatever it may be, for messaging, but we're like working alongside of them. We don't force tools down anybody's um, uh,
No, but
organization.
people
It
see the
ends up
value.
working.
People
Yeah,
see the value in
yeah,
the tools,
yeah.
later. It's a consulting organization can come in and help you get over the hurdle of I have all this code to go fix, and I also have things to do. And so that's super helpful. But in the end of the day, when you're done with that project, the consultants go away, and the core team has to maintain and extend the level of internationalization, or you're going to be right back where you started, in 6 months or a year, because you didn't change the developer practices. And as I mentioned before, the tools really can help. You don't have to buy the tools, but if you don't, you'll have to use other strategies to get people to not do those things that they were doing, that were holding you back.
Thank you. Then the next question sort of smells a little bit like it goes into the AI question, which we only touched about a little earlier. I said to Addison at the beginning of this webinar, this is going to be an AI discussion-free session. But all right, so how do you envision, this is off of LinkedIn Live, how do you envision the role of linguist and localization professionals with new models being part of our day-to-day? And which KPIs can localization teams use to showcase their value? So two-part question. Do you mean to repeat it? Yeah.
No, I have it on my screen here. So
Okay.
it's particularly in the software interfaces, the quality and fluency of the translations really matter. Now, we're generally speaking, the smallest piece of translation for your product will be the user interface, in terms of total number of words. But the impact of those words is the highest. And so natural language generation is still ways off, and it's expensive and slow compared to things. And there's a lot of devices in particular that don't have the horsepower to run natural language generation models and it's kind of dumb to run natural language generation for an error message, because there's no point in that, or translate on time. And then those models all hallucinate. They don't understand anything. They're not giving you human checked, fluent results. Whereas people can go directly to, oh, I see that, this is actually sort of a metaphor in English, and so I need to change my translation. I can't just do a direct translation. It's that level of reasoning is still not present in the modeled world, and that's why it's still MTPE and not. We just ran the machine and it made words and they all looked like they were in a foreign language to me. The human value is still there, and the KPIs are still on the user acceptance and the success of that. And yes, we want to make it cheaper and faster, and we want to remember words we've seen before, and we want to be consistent and all of those things. But it's still that Jeff Bezos thing, right? We're going to build the best German interface for the Germans. How are you going to do that? Is not just blindly accepting the words that come out of the funnel. There's value add in there still, that makes a real difference, and not just it all fit on the screen and it all had German, it all had umlauts in it. So
I'm gonna mention one extreme example along those vision of the role of the linguist it's very different, but might become a mode in the future. We have one, and I'm not advising that everybody do this. I'm not saying this is the future, but we have a particular customer. I can't use their name. They make paint. Industrial paint. So paint has various properties and the like, that the distributor in various places needs to consider for an application for a customer. So they're using a straight pipe from our localizer software to Google Translate, but it's not quite straight. You got to hear how this works. First of all, we prompt so that a coat of paint isn't something you wear. You know, a coat of paint is like that. But then the role of the linguist shifts to using our LQA product, localizer QA. And so they actually go through the application screens, just like any tester would do. And they're logging potential functional issues, but also they're logging translation issues. And when they select an issue to be retranslated, there's actually a natural approval process. Once it's like quickly approved, it writes not to the TMS, it can write to the TMS, but it also can write directly to GitHub or whatever they're using as their repository. And so the change is pretty immediate, as long as, you maybe have an approval workflow because you don't necessarily want to take everybody's advice. Well, instead of going to 8 countries, they went to 38 countries, or 38 languages, I should say. It's more countries than that. And in many cases, they engage their distributors, the linguists at their distributors to do this. So this was a way to get input from people that didn't necessarily know anything about cat tools, but could go through the interface. Now, again, I'm not saying this is, this is the future at all. I mean, if I'm building a medical products company, I'm not doing that.
Feedback from in-country review has been a persistent problem forever,
right.
and it's important, as we move into a smarter world, if you will. How do you feed that feedback into the models that are being used to generate the language? Because otherwise, they just make the same mistake endlessly until you fix them.
Right. Well,
and so you have to, yeah.
Part of that loop is, did you update the translation memory? I mean, that's old technology, but it's still highly useful. Did you update the corpus?
The translation memory, but also mechanisms for building translation engine models, language models that are domain specific,
yes.
and have the right tuning to produce fluency without without challenges. And I remember, I'm not going to tell that story because that's out of school, and it's but everybody has the offensive translation that slipped through, which is absolutely 100% correct and also extremely wrong.
Right. Okay. And that vertical engine that's highly tuned to your product, that to me is a lot more than the current translation MTPE model. That is the scary thing for many linguists around AI, in my mind. The automated prompted system that understands that this is a paint application and can even understand the context of the string paired with an image and the like. But like you say, I still see that it's not going to cover everything. Some interesting questions coming around about that I don't pretend to have the answer, but smarter people than me have their visions. So I'm just reporting what one customer did. All right. Thank you. Somebody just said very interesting and inspiring. Thank you for sharing your expertise. Are there any other questions? Otherwise, I'm going to call a wrap and say, hey, we finished within an hour, which is like a first time for me. All right. All right. Again, everybody, you'll get a recording automatically. There's nothing you need to do. If you joined on LinkedIn Live, that's like done right away for you. Kate, who you probably all will get email from, will send you email with the recording. And thank you, Addison. This has been a pleasure. Always a pleasure to talk and see what's new and all that. So, all right, take care, everyone. Bye.
Cheers all.